Good evening, and welcome to our Wednesday evening live stream here at Empty Cloud Monastery. Welcome back to all the people who may have been joining in online this morning and earlier the past weeks. And also we have a live audience with us who's joining in. So we have lots of Dhamma friends listening together and practicing together, as well as myself, also listening in to what I'm saying. And we have online Ryan. Hello to Ryan, who says, hello from the Peruvian rainforest. Hello. I'm not surprised nowadays they have internet in the Peruvian rainforest. So hope you're doing well there. And Maria. Hello also to Vanessa. And hello to Sean, Julie, Meredith, Mary, and Bhumika. Hello to all the different friends joining in. And hello to anyone who might be watching later on, who might be watching the recording. So hello to Rebecca. Good to see all of you, and glad to see all the faith and the devotions of practicing the Dhamma and practicing these things for freedom and for the benefit of all beings. So it's always really inspiring to see that so many people are interested in coming to the monastery and joining the live streams. So tonight we'll be looking at another sutta, and I will begin by rendering homage to the Buddha 3 times, and then we can go ahead and get started. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang saranang gacchami. Okay, so today we're going to be looking at a sutta that's called the Pallea Sutta, or the Pallea Sutta. There's 2 varieties to it. And this is a sutta which is in the Samyutta Nikaya. So I'll give a very brief introduction to the location of this for those who are less familiar, in case you want to find it or get familiar with the Buddhist canon. So this is in the Samyutta Nikaya, which is the 3rd of the Buddhist collections in Pali. And there's a total of 5. The Samyutta Nikaya means the collection of connected discourses. And they're called connected because these suttas are arranged by topic. So you have suttas, for example, arranged by all about the aggregates. Suttas which are all about the 6 senses. Suttas which are all about mindfulness meditation. Suttas which are all about poems from bhikkhunis or poems from bhikkhus. So they're arranged by topic. The other collections of suttas are not arranged by topic. So you might be reading through and you might be confused. Like, I just read one sutta and then the next one has nothing to do with that. Often it seems that way, right? But in the Samyutta Nikaya, they're all connected and linked together like a garland of flowers. So it's all one thing. Each chapter is one whole collection. And at least to the best extent possible, right? And so this is in the Samyutta Nikaya, and it's in the chapter on the aggregates, which is Samyutta Nikaya number 22, and it is 22.81. 22.81, so that's the 81st sutta in the chapter on the aggregates. And so I'll go ahead and just read the sutta for us, and then I'll go ahead and give some comments. So if you're following along, then feel free to follow the link in the description, or if you have the book, you can open that up. So I'll go ahead and start reading. So this is the Pallea Sutta. At one time, the Buddha was staying near Kosambi in Ghosita's monastery. Then the Buddha robed up in the morning, and taking his bowl and robe, entered Kosambi for alms. After the meal, on his return from alms round, he set his lodgings in order himself. Taking his bowl and robe, without informing his attendants or taking leave of the mendicant Sangha, he set out to go wandering alone with no companion. Then, not long after the Buddha had left, one of the mendicants went to Venerable Ananda and told him what had happened. Ananda said, "Reverend, when the Buddha leaves like this, it means he wants to stay alone. At this time, no one should follow him." Then the Buddha, traveling stage by stage, arrived at Pallea, where he stayed at the root of a sacred sal tree. Then several mendicants went up to Venerable Ananda and exchanged greetings with him. When the greetings and polite conversation were over, they sat down to one side and said to him, "Reverend, it's been a long time since we've heard a Dhamma talk from the Buddha. We wish to hear a Dhamma talk from the Buddha." Then Venerable Ananda, together with those mendicants, went to Pallea to see the Buddha. They bowed and sat down to one side, and the Buddha educated, encouraged, fired up, and inspired them with a Dhamma talk. Now at that time, one of the monks had the thought, "How do you know and see in order to end the defilements in the present life?" Then the Buddha, knowing that monk's train of thought, addressed the mendicants. "Mendicants, I've taught the Dhamma analytically. I've analytically taught the 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation, the 4 right efforts, the 4 bases of psychic power, the 5 faculties, the 5 powers, the 7 awakening factors, and the Noble Eightfold Path. That's why I've taught the Dhamma analytically. Though I've taught the Dhamma analytically, still a certain mendicant present here has this thought. How do you know and see in order to end the defilements in the present life?" So we can go ahead and pause right here. So we had a little introduction, right? A very interesting. So the Buddha he leaves, and the Ananda says this means we shouldn't follow him. He wants to be alone. But one of the monks, they want to hear a Dhamma talk. So the Buddha gives him a Dhamma talk, and while he's speaking, right, one of the monks wonders to himself, how can we attain enlightenment? How can we end what are called the asavas, translated here as the defilements? The asavas are the main defilements which tie us to the cycle of rebirth. So there's many different lists of Buddhist defilements, but specifically the asavas, traditionally, they're often given in a list of 3, sometimes 4. And that is the kamasava. So that's the defilement or the tendency towards sensuality. So it's the mind which is constantly flowing towards sensuality, towards sensual pleasures. And then there's the bhavasava. This is the mind which is constantly tending towards some state of existence, some life. It's the desire to exist, the desire to continue in the cycle of rebirth. So even if we don't believe in an afterlife, but we have this desire in the mind which is constantly trying to exist, trying to grab on and to hold on to something. Not necessarily sensuality, but it just wants to hold on to itself. And then there's the avidyasava, and that's the defilement which is ignorant. It's like the mind which is ignores reality. It's clouded from reality. So that's the thing, is that actually reality is always present to it. It's always presenting itself to us. It's not that reality is hidden, but it's that we ignore the nature of reality. So it's not like impermanence is sort of secret. It's actually out in the open. Impermanence is open for anyone who wants to see to see. The suffering of chasing sensual pleasures, it's not a hidden fact. You don't have to be a kind of special person to see that. It's open for anyone to see. However, we ignore it. We don't want to see. So we cloud. So this is the tendency of the mind which ignores. That's why the translation of avidya as ignorance is actually very powerful. It has some problems because it can imply a lack of kind of intellectual knowledge. But actually, one of the aspects of ignorance is we ignore the nature of reality. So those are the asavas. Those are the 3 main asavas. And so the monk is thinking, how can we end these defilements? How can we get rid of these in our hearts in the present life, right? Because Buddhism is something which we can realize in the present. It's something that someone can practice and realize the fruits of in the present. They don't have to wait until the next life. But the Buddha is a little bit critical because he's saying that he's taught the Dhamma analytically. He's taught it by with a very thorough method, right? He's very thoroughly drawn out the details of the Dhamma, and he gives a list of what are known as the 37 Bodhipakya Dhammas in later tradition. So 37 essentially practices which lead to the end of the defilement. So what he's saying is that he's taught this very thoroughly, right? He's already taught how to end the defilements. He's taught the 4 mindfulness meditations, which are known, many people know them by the word satipatthana, the Pali word. He's taught the 4 right efforts, the 4 bases of psychic power, and on down the list. And so he's given all these different teachings. He's taught in detail how to end the defilements. And he says, although he's taught this, still someone thinks, how do we do it? So I think the point that the Buddha is making is like, he said that. It's kind of the whole point of his teaching, right? The entirety of his career after he attains enlightenment, he teaches out of compassion to end for people to end their defilements. And so the monk is wondering, it's almost like you've been in math class for 12 years, you're about to graduate, and then you start wondering, how is it? What is math? Right? But the teacher is in this thinking, what has been going on with this student, right? I've been teaching math this entire time. They've been in math class for a long time, so they should know what math is by now. And so the Buddha is saying he has taught that. That's exactly what he's been teaching. That is the subject of Buddhism. So then he gives us this list, and this is actually, it's going to be useful because then he's going to go into a little bit more of an analytic discussion. So or I should say a more kind of theoretical discussion. And we'll see that in the next part. So this list is useful because here he's saying, I've given all these practices, but now he's going to give a little bit more theory about the details. So he says, I'll continue the sutta. He says, and how mendicants do you know and see in order to end the defilements in the present life? Take an unlearned, ordinary person who has not seen the noble ones and is neither skilled nor trained in the teaching of the noble ones. They've not seen true persons and are neither skilled nor trained in the teaching of the true persons. They regard form as self. But that regarding is just a conditioned phenomenon. And what's the source, origin, birthplace, and inception of that conditioned phenomenon? When an unlearned, ordinary person is struck by feelings born of contact with ignorance, craving arises. That conditioned phenomenon is born of that. So that conditioned phenomenon is impermanent, conditioned, and dependently originated. And that craving, that feeling, that contact, and that ignorance are also impermanent, conditioned, and dependently originated. That's how you should know and see in order to end the defilements in the present life. Perhaps they don't regard form as self, but they still regard self as possessing form. But that regarding is just a conditioned phenomenon. Perhaps they don't regard form as self or self as possessing form, but they still regard form in self. But that regarding is just a conditioned phenomenon. Perhaps they don't regard form as self, or self as possessing form, or form in self, but they still regard self in form. But that regarding is just a conditioned phenomenon. Perhaps they don't regard form as self, or self as possessing form, or form in self, or self in form, but they regard feeling as self, and then all the permutations of that, or perception as self, in the permutations of that, or choices, which is say volitions as self, and the permutations of that, or consciousness as self. But that regarding is just a conditioned phenomenon. And what's the source of that conditioned phenomenon? When an unlearned, ordinary person is struck by feelings born of contact with ignorance, craving arises. That conditioned phenomenon is born from that. So that conditioned phenomenon is impermanent, conditioned, and dependently originated. And that craving, that feeling, that contact, and that ignorance are also impermanent, conditioned, and dependently originated. That's how you should know and see in order to end the defilements in the present life. Perhaps they don't regard form, or feeling, or perception, or choices, or consciousness as self. Still they have such a view: the self and the cosmos are one and the same. After death, I will be that, permanent, everlasting, eternal, and imperishable. Okay, so we're going to pause here. So I hope that some of you are still listening. Let's just check. Okay, we still have people joining in. So I know it's complicated. That's part of why we're going to go over it. But we can pause here because then the Buddha is going to go into more ways. So what is he saying, right? What is the gist of what the Buddha is saying? He's saying that, how do we end the defilements? Well, one way of doing that is by letting go of the view of self. Letting go of the view of ourself in relation to the different aggregates, and then he'll go on in other ways that we might conceive of a self. So this is what he's saying, right? That's how you should know and see in order to end the defilements in the present life. That's what he's saying. And what he's pointing out, though, is he's saying one way, okay, we can say, oh, okay, you should not think of the aggregates as yourself. You should not think of yourself as in the aggregates or having the aggregates and so on. And we'll go over what that means. But then some people, that we hear that, but then it's not clear, okay, well, how do you actually do that, right? How do you actually practice that? It's one thing to just say it, but then how does it actually play out? And so what the Buddha is doing in this sutta is he's analyzing a little bit more closely how it is that the sense of self actually arises in relation to the aggregates, so that you can get a little bit more tangibly a better sense of how it is that that arises. And then you can, once you see how something arises, then you become dispassionate towards it. Because the trick of the sense of self, friends, the trick of the self is that we take it for granted. So we ignore the fact that we're actually constructing it. So once we, if someone realizes that the sense of self is actually conditioned, it's arising due to causes and conditions, it's not what it appears to be, then naturally, if they see that, then they will no longer have that sense of self. They won't believe it. So there's a distinction, and in some Buddhist traditions, they phrase it like this, which I think is quite good. And they say that what is an illusion? So what is something that, essentially, what is ignorance, right? What is something that appears one way? They say an illusion is something which appears one way, but it not in the way that it actually is. So it appears to actually be a certain way, but that's not how it actually is. So, for example, a mirage, right? When you see water, it looks like water. So it appears to actually be water, but it's not actually water. That's why we say it's an illusion. So when we say illusion, right, what does that actually mean? It means that the way it appears is not what it actually is. So if someone, for example, they have another famous Indian example is someone who has cataracts and they see like a hair in the moon, or they see things in the sky. So it appears that there's things floating in the sky. It appears that there actually are things in the sky, but actually it's not that way. It's not how it actually is. So that's what an illusion is. So once we realize that something is an illusion, like if you think that there really is water, then you might pursue it, right? You might go towards the water. But if you realize that it just appears to be water, it isn't actually water, then you won't believe in it anymore, right? Even if you still see the mirage, like you might still see the exact same thing, but you no longer believe it to be actually what it appears to be. So I hope that that is clear. So that's what, when we talk about an illusion, that's what I'm referring to. So if someone sees that their sense of self, the self appears to be one way, but if you see that it actually is not the way that it appears, then you'll no longer believe that. Just like when you see a water that isn't actually water, or you see something in the sky which is actually due to your own eyes. And so how is it that we can actually look at that process and understand it? Okay. We're probably not going to have time to go through this. So the 5 aggregates are form, feeling, perception, volitions, and consciousness. Bhante Sujato translates Sankara famously as choices, which personally I think it's okay, but I'm just going to use the word volitions just because I think it's a little bit closer. It's a little bit more broad for what we're talking about. And the Buddha defines it in that way. He defines them as cetana. So I'll just put that aside for now, and then we'll talk about it later. So the 5 aggregates, these in Pali are called the panchakandha. More commonly, they're called the panchupadana kandha. So often when the Buddha is talking about these, he just calls them the panchupadana kandha. Why? Because the word kandha in Pali, or skandha in Sanskrit, it means a pile. It means a heap. It means that like a collection. So if I tell someone, I want you to go into the forest and I want you to make a pile, I want you to collect all the flowers. And then they come back and they say, I got all the flowers except the yellow ones. Did they do what I asked? No, right? They didn't collect all the flowers. They got all the flowers except the yellow ones. So a kandha, it means a collection. And the Buddha defines it as it's a collection of every single type of the 5 aggregates. So for example, the aggregate of form, rupa, we translate it as form. This is essentially the physical aspect of our experience. So the physical part of life, right? So life has a physical part. That's like our body and the things we see and touch and smell. So those are physical, right? We encounter them. They have shape and size. They have location. They have physical properties like extension and color and temperature. So that whole aspect, especially internally, our body, and then everything that our body experiences and so on. So that's all physical. That's called rupa. It means form. Form means that it has like a defined shape to it, right? So it has a particular shape with colors and size and location. So that is all aspects of form, of rupa. So the aggregate of form means every single type of form. So at one point a monk asked the Buddha, what does it mean to say the aggregate? What does that word aggregate mean? Khandha. And the Buddha says, here's what it means. Yan kinchi rupang. Atita anagata patyupannang. Ajhatang va bhidhava. Audarikang va sukhamang va. Hinang va pranitang va. Yandure santige va. Sabbang rupang. So he says, it means whatever form there is. Past, future, present, internal, external, subtle, fine, coarse, refined, or high or low, whatever form there is. He's saying that's what it means, the word khandha, that's what it means. It means every type. So like we say, okay, I want you to collect all the blue flowers, the khandha of blue flowers. And if you say, I got all the blue flowers, but I left out the big blue flowers, then you haven't got all of them, right? You haven't got a pile of all the blue flowers. So the Buddha, when he says the aggregate of form, he means every single possible physical thing that you could ever encounter. That's what he means. Internal, external, whether it's the most refined and subtle and lofty or the most coarse and gruesome, that's what he means by the aggregate of form, the collection of all of it. So form is the physical stuff. Then feeling, Vedana. Vedana means a feeling. It's something that you directly experience, like a direct sensation or direct feeling. So it's not feeling in the sense of like a complex emotion, but it's the feelings of like when you feel the world, right? So if you want to know what feeling is, you can just punch your hand. How do you know that? How do you know? Because you feel it, right? Or when someone says something, we feel that. We can sense it. It's like we feel the world. We directly, vividly experience it. That's the Vedana aspect. And it comes in 3 different tones, 3 different flavors. So whenever we feel the world, it can feel pleasurable, painful, or neutral, like bland, flat, right? So pleasurable, maybe you have nice ice cream, if you like ice cream, right? Ice cream, feels good. It's pleasurable. The experience is pleasurable. And then maybe you have something which is not so nice. Maybe you have a pain in your knee during meditation. Okay, that's painful. So you're feeling that, right? You feel it. That's how you know it's there. You feel it, and it feels painful. And then maybe if I ask you, well, how does your right elbow feel right now? And for many people, they don't feel very much, right? Doesn't mean you can't feel it. You can feel it, but it doesn't feel really painful. It doesn't really feel pleasurable. It's very neutral. We say adukkham sukham, neither painful nor pleasurable. So those are the types of feelings. But the aggregate of feeling is every possible feeling. So you say, yes, Mr. Monastic, feelings and so on. But when I was meditating, I had a really strange feeling and it seemed so interesting. And yes, that's also part of the aggregate of feeling. Where you say, when I was in love, it was different. Here at the monastery, we have these little teas, these herbal teas. And on the back of them, they have little phrases. And one of them says, beauty is not caused, it just is, right? And so we might say, yes, feelings, but beauty, there's something special about it. No, it's just another feeling. So all of them, right? I don't want you to come back from the forest with all the yellow flowers except the big ones. All the yellow flowers except the tiny ones. I want all of them, all the flowers, all of them. So when feeling, all of them, people, not some of them, all of them. That's what it means, aggregate. So all the feelings. And then we have perception, sanya. This means like recognition. So for example, when I hold up this, if you recognize it, you recognize that it's a cup, right? It's a mug. You might recognize that this is a handle. You might recognize that this is a tea bag. So what is that, right? It's a recognition. It's a perception. It's something that you could say kind of shapes and sizes our sensory information so that we can understand it. We can make sense of it. So that's perception. Even something basic like distinguishing colors, like blue from yellow from green, that requires recognition, right? It requires us to perceive that. And not every animal or person will perceive the same way. So I'm red-green colorblind. So some people, they experience the world in terms of colors differently than I do. We both feel, right? We both feel the world, but we might perceive something in a different way, right? So I might perceive a tree to be more brown and someone might perceive it to be more green. So that's perception. That's the difference in perception. Or you see, for example, maybe you say, oh, they're so tall. And someone else says, oh, they're so short. So tall and short, they're perceptions. And so perception, it can be something very basic and kind of universal, or universal between air quotes, or it can be something that's very subjective that seems to vary from person to person. Perception is that recognition aspect. And so all perceptions, right? Someone might say, oh, but what if you perceive God? What if you perceive beauty? Isn't that special? Isn't beauty not cause, just is? No, also beauty is a perception. So, well, you could say it is a perception, yes, but it's also part of the aggregate. So the Buddha is not, he's not a nepotist when it comes to these things, right? All of them. He's not a favoritist. Every single one is included. That's the aggregate of perception. And then the aggregate of volitions. This is essentially the part of the mind which is active, right? So a thing like feeling, if someone punches us across the face, we feel that, but it's not really a choice, right? The way that it feels, we can't really affect directly how that is going to be experienced. So some people, maybe they like asparagus. Some people hate it. Some people, they love modern art. Some people, they say anyone could do that. So art, food, pain, almost anything we experience, we feel, and we perceive, oftentimes, to a large extent, we're not really directly in control of it. It's just a passive experience, right? It's not entirely passive, but often that's mostly how it's experienced. Volition, sankhara, is the active part of the mind. It comes from the root kar, which means to do. So it's the part of the mind which actually is thinking and directing the attention, and it's the movements of the mind, and it's the decisions that we make, the moral choices that we make. So it's that part of the mind which is choosing, which is reacting. That's the aggregate of sankhara. All of the reactions, all of the thoughts. And you say, but I had the most amazing thought. That's also the aggregate of thinking. That's the aggregate of reactions. The most amazing choices to the lowest choices, internal choices, external choices, volitions, all these reactions, all of that is the aggregate of sankhara. It's the doer, right? And then the last one, the last aggregate, is the most subtle, and that's vijnana. Vijnana is the aggregate of consciousness. Sometimes I think it's nice to translate this just as awareness, because I think that awareness is a little bit more maybe vivid for some people. Though when we get to words about consciousness and awareness, it often gets shaky. Like some people, they mean awareness as like a kind of mindfulness practice. But awareness or consciousness, it's just the presence of experiences. Okay, so it's the most subtle because it's what we call, it's like a negative aggregate. So negative in the sense that consciousness or awareness, it's not something you're aware of, right? That's what makes it awareness. It's not something you're aware of. So you can't actually be aware of consciousness directly. Like a sword can't cut itself, right? A finger can't point to itself. So you can't actually be directly aware of awareness. Awareness is that which is aware. It's the mere presence of experiences, right? So just imagine if someone is knocked unconscious, although from a Buddhist perspective, we might say that there's still kind of some subtle level of awareness because it can be recalled and so on. But generally speaking, just imagine if someone's knocked unconscious, then what is it that they are experiencing, right? They're not really experiencing anything in particular. They might not even have a clear recollection of time passing, right? It might just be a flash and they're back, right? So consciousness is that which allows experiences to be present. It's the presence of other aggregates. And so the one way that this is talked about sometimes is that the five aggregates, we call them in Pali pancha khandha. Pancha means five. And in English, the word that we have, the same word, the same root, because Sanskrit and Pali are related to English very distantly. the word panja in English, we have the word punch. It means a fist, it means a hand. So punch. So the 5 aggregates, if you imagine a fist, you have form, feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness or awareness. That's the thumb. And the thumb stands apart from the other 4 fingers, right? It's kind of a special finger. So awareness and the other 4, they kind of work as a team. You can't have feeling or perception and so on without consciousness, but you can't have consciousness without feeling or perception. This is something the Buddha teaches and is discussed in the suttas. And so he says that consciousness is always involved in the other 4. It's like a seed that grows with the other 4. So, and it's a kind of mutual conditioning. So one way that might be helpful is you can imagine form. So form is, we can start here, form. And then the ring finger is feeling, right? Because when someone proposes, it feels so emotional. So that's our feeling. That's our ring finger. And then perception, that's our middle finger. Because when you see this finger, perception tells us it's a rude thing. So when we see someone holds up their middle finger, we perceive it as, oh, that's rude. That's like the aspect of language and recognition, right? So this one is the pinky, that's the form. And we have the motions, the ring finger, the feelings. The middle finger, that's the perception. That's the communicative aspect. Then we have the pointer finger. This is the volitions because it's always directing, right? This finger points around. Do this, do that, look here, look there. So that's the volition aggregate. And then the thumb is the special awareness aggregate, which works with the other 4. So you need awareness in order to grab something. You need the thumb, but you can't just grab with your thumb alone. The thumb alone can't operate. You need the whole hand. You need the thumb and the other fingers. So that's the awareness and the other aggregates. So that's one way. And then when you have all 5 aggregates, what do? They punch you in the face, as Pandit Sujata sometimes says. So that's the 5 aggregates. And so the Buddha is saying that people relate to these in terms of a self in 4 ways, or sometimes maybe all 20, right? But especially there's 4 ways it can go. And that is taking the aggregate to be yourself. So most basic, right? Form is self. This would say, you look at your body, you say, this is me. This is myself. This body is myself. So when someone punches us, you say, you punched me, right? They punch your body and they say, you punched me, right? So sometimes we talk just in a way that the body is the person, like that's me, right? But actually the feeling of the pain and the physical flesh are actually separate things, right? They're connected, but they're actually separate. So when we get punched and it hurts, maybe we should get angry at actually the painful sensation. Why do we get angry at the person hitting the body, right? Shouldn't we get angry that we have a painful sensation? So actually it starts getting messy when we look at it. So taking the body as ourself, it's often done, but it has strange consequences, right? If we say the body is me, but there's a lot of aspects of our life that actually are not our body that we would say is me, right? So, but that's the most basic. So I am the body. The body is myself. Who am I? It's my body. So that's one way of thinking about it. Another way of thinking about it, as the Buddha then goes on to say, is he says, just read it in the right order that he gives it. Maybe you don't say your body is yourself. You say, okay, the body, that's not really who I am, but I possess my body. How can you think about this? You can do a little thought experiment. And I want you to imagine if you had someone else's body. So you can imagine, whose body would I like to have, right? Whose body would I like to wear? So you imagine, what would it be like to have someone else's body, right? And what you're doing there is you're imagining that yourself possesses the body. And many people, it's possible to do that thought experiment, right? Because often just culturally, linguistically, that's how we often think about it, right? So you say like, oh, I'm dragging my body around. I'm lugging this body around. Or my body is such a burden today. So we say my body, as if ourself is like something else that's having the body, that possesses the body. And then we think like, oh, I'm this person that I have this body, but I could have a different one. I could imagine myself having a different body. So wait a minute. Am I the body? Or am I the person who has the body? Which one is it? It can't be both, right? Because if someone punches the body and they say, oh, you punched me, but actually I'm a person who has the body, I'm not the body. The body is like a clothing that I put on, then it's inconsistent. There's a contradiction. So is ourself the body, or is it someone who has the body? I am the body, or it's my body, right? So that's a distinction. Another one, the next one, is that people might think, they don't think that their body is who they are, or that they have a body, but they think that their body is in their self. So this might be like, imagine that you imagine yourself to be maybe some kind of mind, and you think that the body is in you. So your mind is like aware of your body, and your body is just a projection of your mind. So it's inside of your mind. That's one way people might think about it, right? So the body is like inside the mind, and the mind is who you really are. That's one. And then the next one is they don't regard that, but then they say they regard their self as in the body. So this would be like you have your body, and you imagine a little person inside there, which is inside controlling it, right? So like a puppet master, looking through the eyes, listening through the ears, tasting through the tongue, and controlling the limbs. And it's like this self which is in the body. So that's another way that it can be imagined. And so those are the four. And these apply to all the different aggregates. So people might take any aspect of their experience, and they imagine that that is who they are, or their self owns that, or that is within their self, or their self is within that thing. So the body is a very obvious example, and then you can extend that to the other aggregates. So that's the teaching. And the Buddha is saying that if you don't do that, then that's one way, that's how you can end the defilements in the present life. So, simple, right? Or is it? So then what is the analysis that the Buddha gives? And if anyone has any questions, feel free to leave those in the chat, and then we'll look at those at the end. Because I know that maybe this will bring up some questions. But so the Buddha says, though, so they regard the body as their self. So we just take this first example, right? You say, I am the body. That's who I am. Right? Who am I? I am this body. If you want to see me, just look at my body, and you're seeing my person. You're seeing me. But he says, but that regarding, so that belief that I am my body, that's a conditioned phenomenon. Specifically, he says it's a sankhara, which could be taken in one of two ways: the broad conditioned sense, or it could be taken as like a volition. It could be taken as like an activity that the mind is doing. I think actually the sense of activity is probably more appropriate here. So what he's saying is that like someone who thinks, oh, I am my body, that attitude, that is an activity that the mind is doing. And that activity, that belief, it's conditioned. It has a source, an origin. And he says, what is it? It's when an unlearned, ordinary person, so just a normal, just your average Joe, just a common person who doesn't know anything about Buddhism, so they don't question their experience in terms of these things. They just take it for granted. What they think and what they experience, they just take that for granted. They take for granted that the mirage really is water, right? So to speak, in terms of this thing. So they just take for granted, without even questioning it, that their thoughts about who they are really are who they are. How it appears they are, that really is how they are. So it's just taken for granted. So when they experience, it says, they're struck by feelings born of contact with ignorance. Craving arises. So this is another complicated teaching, but the Buddha is saying that basically when someone experiences something, so they have contact with the world, they experience something, but they have ignorance, then craving will arise. Right? So this is, again, the normal, you could say, the arising sequence, if for those who know dependent arising. So when we experience the world, if we have ignorance, then naturally we see something and we crave it, we want it, or we hate it, we want to push it away. We hear something and we crave to have it or to push it away. And the same with all the senses, right? Very clearly, if you're meditating, you can see, right? Things appear in the mind and we want them, we want to move towards them, or we want to push them away. We want to not see them. We want to destroy them. So this craving, whenever we experience something, if there's ignorance, then we crave. And he's saying that that's the source. So essentially we experience the body, we experience it, and we have craving towards it. So then we think, oh yeah, this is who I am. We appropriate it, we take it up to get the pleasure out of it, to get something out of it. But that craving and the feeling and the contact and the ignorance, all of those are conditioned, right? We don't always experience our body. We don't always experience feelings in the body. So these types of things, they're conditioned. And so this belief that the body is the self, it arises and it's conditioned. It arises under certain conditions, under certain circumstances. And so he's saying that when you see that, if you see that this belief that the body is who we are is actually an activity that the mind does, which arises in certain circumstances, then you'll no longer believe that how it appears to be. It appears that I am a body. You will no longer believe that that is how it actually is. And then he goes on for all of the aggregates. He says this. So essentially, and I want to talk about this in more detail, but I want to get through the basic sense, and then we'll go through it. The basic idea is that the belief in self, it's a belief. It's an actual mental activity. So we have to question that, right? Even if you think, okay, I don't know what this monk is on about, but at least what you can see, you can acknowledge, right? Well, I do have certain beliefs about who I am. At least we seem to act that way, right? Like I said, someone hits us and we say, you hit me, and our feelings get hurt. So we seem to, clearly we have beliefs, right? But we should at least be willing to question those beliefs. Say, well, wait a minute. Who told me I am my body? And why do I seem to hold contradictory beliefs? Like sometimes I am my body, but sometimes I have my body, as if I was separate from it. So which one is it? So, and then so on, right? Or am I in my mind? Am I in my awareness? Am I in my awareness? Am I in my feelings, and so on? So all these different things, right? We can at least start to question that. So the Buddha is saying, well, okay, first of all, let's just acknowledge that is a belief. And that belief is conditioned. So it's not permanent. So if it's not permanent, then why would it be so that it's actually true, right? Like if only sometimes you have the belief, and under other circumstances, the belief wouldn't be there, then why should you trust it? It's only there sometimes. It's kind of like sometimes you see things in the sky, but then sometimes you don't see them. Why would you trust that they really are in the sky if they also disappear? Like, which one is it, right? So if the belief is actually conditioned, then it starts to make us question it. Like, oh, doesn't necessarily have to be there. So the belief in a self, it doesn't have to be there. It's not a fixed, permanent aspect of reality. And so that can be grounds to question the belief in self. So in terms of the aggregates, one practice that you can do is you can just start to examine. You can start to actually question yourself sitting down, and you can start to question, like, where is myself? Like, where am I? Am I in my body or not? Do I possess my body? Is my body inside of me, or am I inside of my body? And so on. Am I feelings? Like when I feel pain, is that who I am? That feeling is me? Or do I have feelings? Like I possess the feelings. When feelings come, I'm the experiencer of those. Or are feelings in me? Like I have this astral body which has feelings inside of it. That's who I really am, though. I'm the one that has the feelings in it. Not the body, but something else that has feelings. So there's all these different views, right? And so we start to examine that. And the Buddha is saying that all of those views of self, they are conditional or circumstantial experiences, which arise because of craving, because of ignorance and craving. So there's a particular feeling, there's a particular experience of the world, and we have craving towards it. So then we assume the belief of the self in regards to it. So I'll leave that for now, and then we can come back to it. But I want to continue on with the sutta so we can continue. So then you hear, okay, so I'm not my body. The Buddha says we're not our body, our feelings, our perceptions, our volitions, our consciousness. We don't have those things. We're not in those things. Those things are not in us. So he says maybe they don't think that, but then still they have a view. The self and the cosmos, the self and the universe are one and the same. After death, I will be that, permanent, everlasting, eternal, and imperishable. So this is like the view, I am the universe, man. The universe is me, right? This is the kind of hippie sort of new agey view of like, you're not any of these particular things, but you're the vast universe. You and that are the same thing. You're just part of the universe. It's yourself. And when you die, you're just going to merge with the universe. You're going to be that everlasting, permanent, eternal, and imperishable. So that is the view of myself and the cosmos are one and the same. But the Buddha says, but that eternalist view is just a mental activity. And what's the source of that mental activity? The source of it, right, is experiencing something, experience a feeling with ignorance, and then craving it. So it's a conditioned experience, and then assuming, oh, I am the universe are one and the same. Like maybe you never thought that until you heard it. So you heard someone say that, and you oh, that feels good. I like that. I like that belief. It sounds nice. And so then you crave it, you like it, and then you assume that belief, and you assume it. Oh yeah, I am the universe. When I die, I'll merge with the universe. I'll be eternal like that. So it's a conditioned belief. It wasn't always there, and it doesn't have to always be there. Okay. Then he says, perhaps they don't regard form or feeling or perception or choices or consciousness as self, nor do they have such a view. The self and the cosmos are one and the same. After death, I will be that, permanent, everlasting, eternal, and imperishable. So they don't have any of those views, but still they have a view. I might not be, and it might not be mine. I will not be, and it will not be mine. So this is the view, and the Buddha says, but that annihilationist view is just a mental activity. So this is the view of what the Buddha calls annihilationists, Ayya Vaḍḍha. So this is the view like, I might not be, and I will not be. This is the view like, well, okay, maybe I'm not one of these things, but I will cease to exist. At some point, I will cease to exist. So like, maybe I'm not the universe, I'm not the aggregates, but I'll cease to exist. So sometimes this can happen if you start practicing Buddhism and you hear these things about, say, the aggregates and so on, and you think, okay, so I'm not any of those things, but then you still might think like, oh, well, after death, we cease to exist. So it's a kind of annihilationist view, which doesn't necessarily fixate on particulars of the self, but it still has this belief that the self is going to be annihilated somehow. The self is going to cease to exist. So it still assumes a self ceasing to exist, being annihilated. Just like the cosmos, it doesn't necessarily fixate on particulars of life, but it assumes that the self and the cosmos are one and the same, and that they're going to be eternal together. So it's a kind of more general, more vague, and broad view of annihilation or eternalism. And he says, but that is also conditioned, right? So that view of annihilation, that after death you will cease to exist, or that things that you have will no longer be yours, that and forever, that is also conditioned. That is also a belief, a mental activity, which arises under certain conditions. And you can observe those conditions. You can observe how that arises, how that belief comes to be. Okay, so then he says, perhaps they don't regard form or feeling or perception or volitions or consciousness as self. Nor do they have such a view. The self and the cosmos are one and the same. After death, I will be that, permanent, everlasting, eternal, and imperishable. Nor do they have such a view. I might not be, and it might not be mine. I will not be, and it will not be mine. Still, they have doubts and uncertainties. They're undecided about the true teaching. So this is when someone says, oh, so what am I, right? Like, I'm not this, I'm not that, we're not eternal, we're not going to be annihilated. So what is this? So he's saying, okay, so maybe they don't think any of that, but they have doubts and uncertainties. They just don't get it. It's just confusing. So that is also very common, right? So when the Buddha teaches non-self, he's saying sometimes people, they say, oh yeah, okay, but I'm the cosmos then. He's saying, no. So they say, oh, okay, so the annihilationist, I'll be annihilated then. So he's saying, okay, no. So he's saying, so then, okay, so what? So then it's just confusing, right? It's just perplexing. He's saying, so they have doubt and uncertainty. But he says, but that doubt and uncertainty, the indecision about the true teaching, guess what, folks? That is just a mental activity. And what's the source of that mental activity? When an unlearned, ordinary person is struck by feelings born of contact with ignorance, craving arises. That mental activity is born from that. So that mental activity is impermanent, conditioned, and dependently originated. And that craving, the feeling, the contact, and the ignorance are also impermanent, conditioned, and dependently originated. That's how you should know and see in order to end the defilements in the present life. And that's the end of the sutta. So, I want to maybe try to make this more practical. So, but the last of this I find I think that the last thing, it ends on a very practical note, because then you can start to really get a sense of like, what is the Buddha talking about, right? So he's saying, okay, all these views of self, they are mental activities, they are beliefs, they are conditioned phenomena, which arise under certain conditions. Under other conditions, they won't arise. So the Buddha, like for example, the Buddha has rid himself of ignorance. So he doesn't believe he doesn't believe any of those views, nor does he have doubt and uncertainty about it. So that it's an impermanent belief, and it's a conditioned belief. It's kind of like a child believes in Santa Claus, right? But it's conditioned. Under other conditions, they will no longer believe in Santa Claus. Once they find out, they see their parents and they wake up in the middle of the night, and their parents are wrapping the gifts and putting them under the tree. They're shattered. Santa Claus, does he not exist? So all of a sudden, it appeared that Santa Claus was bringing gifts, but it wasn't actually that way, right? So the belief in Santa Claus, it's conditioned. It's a mental activity that it arises when there's ignorance and you have certain experiences. Like you wake up and all of a sudden there's presents under the tree. You think, if there's no Santa Claus, who would bring these presents? It's the same with the Dhamma. If there's no self, who gets reborn, right? Who told you you need to believe in Santa Claus? So in this case, we don't have parents telling us you have this self who must get reborn. You have this thing who must be, you must be something. So, but yet we have this belief, which is conditioned, is what the Buddha is saying. And that belief can then be questioned. It can be analyzed. It can be put under scrutiny. You kind of lock it down. You put it in a room. You say, listen here. I want to find out, where are you coming from? Where are you getting this information from? Self, view of self. And you can start questioning it in this way. And you can start to see how it arises under certain conditions. It doesn't arise under others. So, but the most practical note of this, I think that kind of Sutta starts to turn around on that point, is when the Buddha says that someone might have doubt and uncertainty. But he says, but the doubt and uncertainty is just a mental activity, which is also conditioned in the exact same way. So often with the teaching on non-self, often people get doubt and uncertainty and indecision, and it's confusing to people, and also impractical maybe for people, or it becomes too intellectual, too kind of theoretical and divorced from reality. And the Buddha is saying, like, any of those emotions that go around the self, they are just these processes which are conditioned. So you can also observe that. If you have doubt about the self, you have doubt about the teaching on no self, or you have a belief about no self, you don't have to take it seriously. You don't have to even take doubt seriously. That's the trick of doubt. Doubt makes us think that we have to pursue the question, which will never be answered. So we don't believe it, and we start to see, oh, wait a minute, but the doubt is conditioned. And that's the same with all the other views of self, the Buddha is saying. Okay, so going back to the beginning of the sutta, though, right before the Buddha went into this, right, he gave a list of all the different practices that he taught. So at this point, you might be thinking, okay, this teaching on no self is very complicated. So maybe the mindfulness meditation, the Buddha said that one is good enough. So maybe we go back to that, right? Maybe just be mindful of breathing. That seems good enough. Maybe just practice the Noble Eightfold Path, right? All this theorizing about no self. So remember that the Buddha actually started this whole Dhamma talk that he was giving to the monks. He actually started it by saying, I've already taught that. And then he gives another teaching on non-self. So actually this teaching is contained in the others, and the other teachings contain the teaching on non-self. So they go together. And there's one sutta where the Buddha says that monks, they should meditate on he says that arahants and they naturally meditate on, they practice mindfulness meditation. They practice satipatthana meditation. And they do that, and they have fully understood what they're meditating on. So for example, they meditate on the body, and the arahants can attain samadhi based on the body, and they also understand the nature of the body. So by observing something very closely, you can start to get to know it. And so that's why mindfulness meditation, if it's done properly, it will include the practice of non-self. Because if you're observing something very closely, you start to get to know it much more intimately, right? Ajahn Brahm, the famous monastic who many of you will know, he has a teaching on the lotus under the sun, which I think is very beautiful. And he talks about how you have a lotus which is closed, but as the sun shines on it, it will start opening gradually to the warmth of the sunlight. So you can't see what's in there at first, right? It's closed. But as the sun shines and the heat and the light open it up, and it wants to experience the light, the lotus starts opening, and you start to see more details of the lotus, right? You start to get closer, and you start to see the beauty of the lotus opening up. So that's like the gentle, mindful attention that we apply in meditation. As we apply that on ourselves, as we apply that to our experience of life, then originally it seems very confusing, very closed, but we apply close attention, close, gentle, mindful awareness, experiencing that with clarity and with consistent, sustained application of mind, then it can start to open itself up to us. And so naturally, if you just observe the body, like I said at the beginning, ignorance is not a hidden fact. It is in plain sight. People die left and right, and yet we have the delusion that we won't die. Right? So it's an obvious fact of life. The problem is that we ignore it. So we have to sustain our attention with gentleness and clarity for longer in order to allow that fact to reveal itself more clearly to us. So that's how, for example, the mindfulness meditation is one aspect of the same type of teaching. And it's the same for the others. So the right efforts, right? The effort to purify the mind. So the Buddha is talking here about how the view of self, for example, it arises because of craving towards feelings. Well, right effort is the effort to purify craving. It's the effort to purify aversion and purify confusion. And that effort naturally then will start to open up and clarify our experience, right? If you start to remove your craving, you start to experience not what you project on the world, not what you want the world to be, but you start to experience how it's presenting itself to you. And it becomes more obvious. The world is screaming at us, I am impermanent. I am not personal. I am not who you think I am. It's screaming, but we don't want to listen. We are madly in love with what we believe to be ourselves. So it's like someone who is a horrible, horrible person, but we love them so dearly. We're so obsessed that we just don't want to accept the reality that they're not, it's not good. It's not working out. That's our relationship with ourselves. We don't want to accept, like, our body is killing us, literally killing us. It is filled with diseases. It is constantly at risk of dying. It is constantly in pain, and it's a burden. And yet we think, oh, but I love it so much. I want to dress it up and put it in nice clothing and give it makeup and put on some nice colognes and go enjoy other bodies, right? But yet it's screaming and it's constantly attacking and assaulting us. So we just have to apply closer attention, closer gentle awareness, and it becomes obvious. The body is not a nice partner, right? It's an abusive relationship. And it's the same with our feelings. We think, oh, when I have this tea, it's so pleasant. But then when I burn my tongue, it's not pleasant. So that we can't favor one and ignore the other. We have to be open to reality. Reality has pleasure and pain, and it has neutral feeling. So being open, being mindful, it allows reality to express itself. So reality is not a pleasant, beautiful place. It's a mixed place, which is subjecting us to lots of difficulty as well. And so we start to become more aware of that as we start practicing our mindfulness and our clarity, and our life becomes more clear as we start to apply right effort to purify our mind. Then he goes into the 4 bases of psychic power. So as we apply a willingness to our practice, and we exert ourselves in our practice, and we apply our mind and apply our attention, and we investigate our experience with wisdom and discernment, again, same thing. It naturally will open up. The 5 faculties and the 5 powers. I don't want to overwhelm you with teachings. Just if these are too much, just let them slip off. But for those who know, the 5 faculties and 5 powers, faith. When you have faith, then you start to put forth energy, purify your mind. Then you start having better, clearer, sharper, consistent mindfulness. You start to see better. And then as your mindfulness grows, eventually you can start developing samadhi. You can start developing mind which is much more stable and consistent with mindfulness. And then your mind can be very, very clear, and it can see into reality and get wisdom. So you don't have to get bogged up in the detailed theories, though they are important. I don't want to dismiss them. But I'm just saying, why did the Buddha do it this way? He's saying that he's already taught this, but he's going to give it he's going to approach it from a different angle, from a theoretical angle, because it's less obvious with the practical examples. Because we can very easily deceive ourselves, friends, right? We can very easily deceive ourselves. You practice mindfulness meditation, and it's like, oh, yes, maybe the body doesn't seem to be yourself, the feelings don't seem to be yourself. But the one who knows, the one who is observing, the meditator, the one sitting on the cushion who is doing the meditation, then so easily people think that's who they are. Like, oh, maybe I'm not the body, I'm not the feelings, I'm not my thoughts, but I am the one who is I am the one who knows, I'm the one who's meditating. So very easily we can deceive ourselves. So that is not the case. That's what he's saying. He's saying that's another conditioned belief. It's a conditioned belief. Through ignorance, meaning it's ignoring how reality really is, and it is through craving. It's desiring to hold on to something. So the practices that the Buddha lays out, they are complete in and of themselves. However, sometimes if we don't apply them in their full broad context, we can miss out on the details. We can start kind of excluding parts. Remember the image I gave of the aggregates with the flowers. So we start meditating and we start collecting, okay, the sensations, the body, the thoughts, and everything. But we start missing some of the flowers. Like, I got all the stuff except for these ones. These ones are myself. So the Buddha is saying, no, all of it, all the awareness, all the volitions, all the perceptions, all the feelings, and all the physical experiences. So also the cosmos. So like, I mean, all of it, right? So all of that, it's the belief in self in regards to it is a conditioned belief. So this is why I think the Buddha is drawing this out in this sutta. The monk was a little bit confused, right? And he's saying, okay, maybe he's going into more detail about how it is that the view of self arises in regards to these. And so because this is just like, it's such a vast topic that we could be sitting here for just days talking about it, and that it's hard to get across like how exactly to apply it directly. But I think one thing that I would like to mention in regards to this, in terms of connecting these practices with this theory that the Buddha is teaching on the self and so on, one thing I'd like to get across is that here the Buddha is really emphasizing, right, how he's saying the belief in self is born from craving. So let's get real. Most of our beliefs are not rational. They're emotional, right? We want to, it's not that we don't believe like, oh, this is myself, because we worked it out through a philosophical theory. Most people, they believe it because they like it, right? Like, we believe that we are experiencing all the sensations because we like the pleasure, we want it. And we think, well, we can just push enough away, we can just push the pain away enough and enjoy the pleasure, enjoy the peace, enjoy the equanimity and so on, that's good enough for us. So we attach, and we have these beliefs realistically because we like it, because we have craving, not because of a detailed philosophy. Sometimes, yes, philosophy and thinking and rationalizing, it will contribute. However, much of it is craving, and that's what the Buddha is pointing to. He's saying that these beliefs, they're related to craving, they're related to delighting, they're not impartial beliefs. And so one thing that we can do is we can start, as I mentioned, the Buddha, he mentions how right effort and so on is one of the applications of realizing this. So if we start applying right effort specifically towards craving, specifically towards the feelings and the craving, and seeing how it is that we start delighting in the world, how it is that we start enjoying and getting caught up in the world, then it will start to become naturally obvious and apparent to you that that is not personal. Because like I said, it's screaming at us. It's not personal, but because we love it so much, we don't listen. So one just really down-to-earth practice, which is just so powerful, is sense restraint. Sense restraint, Indriya Samvara, sense restraint is the turning point of Buddhist practice, because it's the turning point between just ordinary virtue and meditation. It's like the middle point. So it's the kind of turning point where we go from just following precepts, but enjoying ourselves and kind of living a worldly life. Once we start practicing sense restraint, we start turning away from the world. And that's when you start getting into meditation, because meditation is a more advanced form of sense restraint, right? So sense restraint is the kind of axle of the whole path. Like, you can either be on this side, or in the middle, and it will turn at sense restraint. So if you're practicing generosity and you're following precepts, but your meditation is not going very well, it's because you're not practicing sense restraint. So sense restraint is the point where the practice starts turning towards the meditation side. And it's very powerful, because sense restraint is, where it fits on the path is right effort. And it is the effort that we apply to not get caught up in desire and aversion towards our experiences. So remember that the Buddha is saying that the view of self is born from contact. Contact is a sensory experience. So when we have sense restraint towards our sensory experiences, then the feelings and the craving that we experience, they will start diminishing. You will start becoming more aware of them. And that means that you're catching exactly the point where the Buddha is saying the belief in self arises. So the belief in self, it is dependent on, it is nourished and fed by, he says, the birthplace, the source, the origin, the fuel of that whole edifice, that whole edifice, that whole structure, the view of self. it's fueled and fed and nourished and born in the light and the senses. So if you start practicing sense restraint, naturally, you will start, it'll start becoming clear to you that the senses and the experiences of the senses are impersonal. They're fleeting. They're not reliable. So, for example, when we sit down to have our meal, we recite the meal contemplation, right? Patisankha yoniso pindapatam patisevami, and we recite that. And we say that we don't eat for pleasure and for indulgence and enjoyment, but we eat to sustain the body, right? But sometimes the meal can very easily turn into like a vortex that just sucks the mind in, and the mind is just stuck on delighting in the flavors and the sensations. It's stuck on the food, right? So food is one of the things that can be very obsessing to the mind. In Italy, it is the national religion. So and in many cultures it is as well. So food is just an obsession with the mind, and it's obsession for most people that are obsessed with food. So food is one very practical place because everyone has to eat. The Buddha says, "Sabbe sata aharatika." So all beings sustain on nutriment. They all depend on nutriment. So we all have to eat something. And so one place we can start catching this is just eating with more mindfulness, with more sense restraint, with more awareness of the craving and so on that arises there. And then you'll start to see that actually eating is a chore. You have to do so much chewing. It takes a long time. And it also, you can just very easily, you can overeat or undereat. Very quickly, you're not full anymore. Sometimes you get disappointed. You think, oh, this is going to be something, and then you bite into it. Actually, there's going to be something else. So just, it's so disappointing. And like, you think, oh, this is going to be so good. It's never as good as you think it's going to be. It's always a little bit worse. The temperature could be a little bit cooler or a little bit warmer. And by the time you're done, then it's over. Maybe you have a really amazing meal. The meal's over. What was that, 20 minutes? And now you have the whole rest of the day, or whatever you're doing, however many meals you're eating, until the next meal. And it's gone. It's just gone. It's over. And you can't keep eating and eating, right? We can only eat so much. So food is really, really unsatisfying. It's really not like a nourishing, fulfilling experience. But we just build a whole world around it. Why do we build a world around it? Because otherwise it wouldn't be fulfilling. In and of itself, food is not fulfilling. So we have to fill it with all these fantasies and projections in order to make it more fulfilling. So once you start just cutting away, slashing away those fantasies and projections, and you don't live to eat, but you start eating to live, then you will start noticing that food is not satisfying. Food is really just, if anything, it is a chore. And we should just do it to sustain our body. Not with aversion. We shouldn't have aversion towards eating, but it just should be purely practical, right? And we can rejoice in the generosity of people, so we can rejoice in the spiritual qualities, but rejoicing in like the sensual experience of food, it is not a fulfilling experience. And so when you start practicing, many people, they hear this and they think, I love food and I don't know what you're talking about. You're crazy, right? Those people identify with their body. So identifying with the body goes hand in hand with sensual desire. If the body is not personal, then you won't enjoy in the sense that you won't be delighting in it. The simile the Buddha gives for this, with all the aggregates actually, is he says, monks, he's sitting in the park, and he says, monks, do you see those twigs over there? You see those sticks? And they say, yes, we see those. And he says, imagine if someone were to come into this park and they were to take the sticks and carry them away. Would you think, oh no, they're carrying us away, they're taking us away, they're stealing us? And they say, no, we would not think that. He says, why not? They say, because those sticks are not us. They don't belong to us. They're not ourselves. So what is it that makes the sticks not personal? Like, why are the sticks different from our body? Right? Did we grow our body? No. And we didn't grow the sticks either. Did we craft it? No. Can we make it eternal? Can we make it stop dying? Can we just get rid of illnesses at a whim? Can we make ourselves insusceptible to illnesses or sickness or harsh words or painful sensations? Can we control our body? Do we have ultimate control over it? Or does it have its own nature? a nature of arising and ceasing, being subject to different sensations, of having a particular size and shape? Are we just subject to the body rather than the body being subject to us? So it's exactly the same as the sticks. There's not the slightest mote of really difference. There's really nothing different. So why are the sticks impersonal? You might say, well, I can move my body around. You can also move sticks around. So moving the body is not enough to make it personal, because you can move sticks, and yet we don't take them personally, unless you have like a walking stick, which you love. So then it's not a good example, right? We start taking things personally, and then all of a sudden it becomes part of us. But it's arbitrary. There's nothing different from our body and the sticks. And yet we think if someone takes our body, we think, oh no, they're taking me away. Someone hits us, oh no, they're hitting me. They burn us, oh no, they're burning me. But they carry the sticks away, oh, it's no big deal, not me. They hit the sticks, they break the sticks, oh, no big deal. So what is the difference, right? Also sensations. Sensations, the Buddha says, are like bubbles on water. They're like raindrops forming bubbles on water. So a raindrop hits the water, it forms a little bubble, and then it pops. So we have these sensations, they come and go. They're so vanishing, so fleeting, so impermanent, so conditioned. You can't make yourself feel a particular way whenever you want, however you want. You're subject to your feelings. You're the victim of your feelings. We are the victims of these things, not the other way around. So why do we take it so personally? Like we experience pain, let the pain be. Why do we say, oh, I am experiencing the pain, or this pain is me, or this is myself? Why? It's just a temporary experience. Just like rain or clouds, they're just temporary experiences. You can't control them. So we take it personally because we do. Because we have craving towards it. Because we're wrapped up in it. Because we get something out of it. That's why. So what makes the difference between grandma's walking stick, which she gave you 20 years ago and you love so dearly and you would be so upset if someone stole it, and the stick out in the yard? What's the difference? The difference is craving. That's the difference, right? The walking stick that you love dearly, you like it, you want it, you get pleasure, you have sentimental value, you take it personally. It's craving. That's the only difference. So that's the same with everything, all aspects of our body and mind, and everything else. The Buddha is saying it's just because of craving. It's just because you get something out of it that you want to enjoy. You want to suck the pleasure out of it, basically. Suck the safety out of it. But actually, it's really not worth doing that. It's really not worth, because when you try to hold on to something, actually it ends up burning you, because it also is subject to pain, and you get attached to it, but then it disappoints you. It arises and ceases of its own accord. So we build this delusion around controlling, owning, having, being, in order to get pleasure, to get safety, but actually it doesn't give us pleasure and safety, only a very limited extent, and ultimately it will always disappoint. Because whenever you have attachment, whenever you have an expectation, the nature of an expectation is to disappoint yourself. Then any expectation, you'll just be disappointed by it. Any attachment, you'll just be disappointed by it. You won't be disappointed if you just let it be. Just let it be, and it won't disappoint you, because you weren't expecting it to be anything other than it is, right? Like if you don't mind the body, like you accept fully that the body has the nature of getting sick, getting cancer, bandits sawing your arms off, being tortured in a prison cell for 80 years, that can all happen. That can happen. That happens to people. So we can't just pretend like, well, it's not going to happen to me. Well, it might. In next life, it might. Next life after that, it might. So the body is ultimately, it will always disappoint. But if you don't expect it to be anything other than a nest of danger with occasional moments of nice fleeting experiences, you won't be disappointed, because that's exactly what it is. So we shouldn't build these expectations around our body, and the same around our sensations, our feelings, the same around our perceptions. You might have a very nice perception. Like you might have some people, they get a meditation experience, they have a perception, and what do they do right after? They want it back. But you can't get it back whenever you want. It doesn't work that way. So like meditation, perceptions of meditation, or beautiful spiritual perceptions and experiences, those are also conditioned, and we don't control them. They're circumstantial. Also our choices. One of the best examples of choices that you can do, a practical example, is you can just try to not have a choice. Like right now, can we choose to be free of choosing? Or are we the victims of choosing? So like, are we the one who decides? Or do choices just happen and we have to be there for it? Like, we have to participate in it. We don't have a choice. Even if you say, okay, I'll choose to sit still. Well, you're making a choice to sit still. I'll choose to relax. I'll choose to speak. I'll choose to be silent. You can't not choose. Choices have to happen. We are the victims of choosing. We must choose. So it's not even like, oh, I'm the controller, the chooser, the doer, the selector, and they just do these choices, just do whatever I pick. It doesn't work that way. The choices have to be here. We are just the victims, which must be participating in this. Like, we have to be there for the show. We have to be participating in the choosing and contributing to it. It's almost like you're part of some kind of like a legal business, and you have no choice but to contribute to the illegal business. Like, you can't step out. There's no way out. So the choices have to come. The choices constantly arise and cease, and yet we have to participate in them. So we're not choosing. We are the victims of the choice of the choosing. We're not, just like the body and the sensations and the perceptions. And it's the same with thinking and so on. Like, you can't think not to think. That would be another thought. Another famous example of this, choice is not self, is everyone right now, please, no one think of pink unicorns. No one think of pink unicorns. Don't think about them. Don't think pink unicorns. Right? So just our thoughts, they arise due to causes and conditions. And this becomes even more apparent when we're meditating, right? You start meditating and you have a thought, and you often can't control the mind. Say, okay, just focus, mind, just be still. But it doesn't. So you're not in charge of your thoughts and your choices and your volitions and your mental activities. You're just another voice screaming in a loud room. It's not in control. So this chooser, this doer, this controller, this puppet master, it's not really in control. It's just like another voice among 30, 50, 20, 100, a million. There's all these voices constantly screaming within ourselves, making choices, having reactions, having opinions, having preferences and judgments, choosing and thinking and liking and disliking and reacting. And we are kind of, the feeling of a controller is just another conditioned feeling, another conditioned choice, which arises and ceases. It's not permanent. It's not always there. Sometimes people are sleeping, they don't have the choice, the sense of choosing anymore. People are unconscious, they don't have the sense of choosing anymore. So it's only temporary as well. It's conditioned. It doesn't always have to be there. It's not permanent. So even the feeling of a controller, of a doer, of a chooser, that's also permanent, temporary. And it's not, we can't control it. We can't make it come or make it go. It arises due to its own circumstances. And finally, awareness. The same is true of awareness. If our eyes are taken away, our visual awareness will no longer arise. Visual awareness is conditioned. So awareness is conditioned. Like the presence of sights is conditioned by having, for example, eyes, and other factors as well. There's many factors. So awareness is not like a solitary, unique, independently existing thing, which is just there. It is also a conditioned, circumstantial process. And that's true of every type of awareness, the whole aggregate of awareness, high and low and so on. So one way that this can be done is just as you're practicing sense restraint, as you start to, everything you see, hear, think, smell, touch, or taste, all of those sensory experiences, including the feeling of being the controller, the one standing behind the observer, even that, just say, oh, that's just another experience which I can't control. Every little bit of it, just see how it is. You're not the controller of it. You are subject to it. It is just here. So it's like these things are just present to us, and we have no choice but to be there with them. And they are constantly shifting and changing and unstable and subjecting us to different circumstances. And we just have to go along for the ride. Even the feeling of being there with them is also conditioned. So you can just observe how whatever ground you think you can stand on, whatever ground you think you have no choice but to be there with it. So it's not actually yours. You're a side thought, an afterthought. Like ourself is an afterthought. And that's why the Buddha says in the Dhammapada, even their self is not their own. Even their self is not their self. Like even our own self, we don't actually control or own that, because even our own sense of self it's not something that we chose to have. We can't just will it away. So even the sense of self is just something we're along for the ride for. It's circumstantially arisen. So these are just a few kind of vague thoughts and different kind of ideas to get you thinking about this issue, because it takes such a long time to go through it, and it really requires a lot of practice. But I really want to emphasize the connection the Buddha makes between the mindfulness practice and the meditation practices, as well as with sense restraint and craving. Like specifically that point, how he's making the point that this theoretical understanding, this theoretical topic of non-self, is a practical one. They're interrelated. And so, and they're related to craving and desire. Like they're not purely intellectual or theoretical views. So if we start practicing restraint, start practicing removing the craving and the desire, you'll start seeing like, oh, my tongue is just here. It's just there. It's just subject to these things. I don't have the say over it. It has its own nature. My thoughts, my thinking, my choosing, my doing, my awareness, they're circumstantially arisen. They're just there. They're conditioned things that are just present that I'm subject to. Even myself feeling subject to these things, even that feeling of the self, even that is like a temporary conditioned thing. So even that is not what it appears to be. So these are some thoughts on this issue, and maybe in the future we can talk about it a little bit more. But yeah, I think those 2 points of like the mindfulness practice and getting to know these things, and the sense restraint practice, these are really helpful issues. And then you can also explore these things. Like I said, you can start exploring and really just questioning yourself, putting these views up and seeing like, oh, why is this arising? Why do I think this? Often, or almost always, we have a view of self because we want to have some kind of refuge. Like we want to have some place where we can rest, some solid ground that we can stand on. So like I said, like maybe the thoughts and the emotions and sensations are fleeting in meditation. So we want to kind of stand back on the kind of observer. We want to be that like watcher, but also that is conditioned. So you can't stand there. And the last thing maybe I'll say is also contemplation of death. Contemplation of death is really, really powerful for addressing the belief of the self. Because like I said, the self is like this belief of this stable, permanent ground, this kind of background, which is always there, despite the changing things. So as you contemplate death and how all these different things that we rest on, the ground will be ripped out from under us. When you contemplate that and you maintain that perception, you maintain the perception of death and impermanence in regards to what you hold most dear, to what you rely on, then you'll start to become more and more obvious, like, oh my God, this is not safe. Like, oh wow, this is not reliable. Like I'm taking refuge in my body, I'm taking refuge in my feelings and my sensations, my perceptions and my volitions or my awareness, or in something else, some other idea or concept or belief. You start saying, oh wow, that is not going to last. That's going to be taken away out from under my feet. And when you start contemplating death in that way, and also practicing sense restraint to not get roused and caught up in the desire and aversion for it, you start to see like, oh wow, that's not something that's reliable. And so that is another helpful practice. So mindfulness meditation with gentleness and clear awareness to start getting to know these things, sense restraint and contemplation of death, as well as just questioning and opening yourself to what views you hold. Those are all really helpful practices in this. So we're just about out of time, just for a few questions. So at this time we can close with 3 sadhus and then address any questions. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, we have some questions online, so I'll go ahead and address these first. So we have a question from Kumo says, Bhante, how does sankhara differ from manasikara? Manasikara means like a mental application. You could say manasikara is one aspect of sankhara. So mental application is one aspect of our intentions. But it's not all of it, right? Like when you apply your attention to something and then maybe you react with greed, or you choose to do something about it, that choice, that's also part of sankhara. So the mental application, how we move around the mind, the movement of the mind, that is just it's an aspect of sankhara. Okay, and then Ryan says, so what you are saying is we are consciousness experiencing form and mind in human form currently. No, that's not what I'm saying. Or is it what the Buddha is saying? We are consciousness experiencing form and mind in human form. Yeah, so this is the idea, like I said, this is the idea of like we are the idea of like being the observer, which is just standing behind everything and experiencing everything. This is like the puppet master idea, or like the ghost in the machine. Like the the common image of this is you imagine a car, right? You take a machine, you say, okay, so the car is moving, right? So what is moving the car? Like what is moving? What's making the car move? You say, oh, there's a little man in there, which is pushing the engine up and down. And that's what makes it move. But when you open up the engine, do you see a little man opening, pushing and pulling and moving the car parts? No. And so you say, oh, okay, so there's the engine just moves the car. But what makes the engine move? There's a little man in there. Right? But then you open up the engine, and the engine also is just made of parts, which are moving. You say, okay, maybe in the parts, there's little goblins inside of each of one of those. No, you'll never find like a little goblin inside the car. There's not one. It doesn't need to be one. And so it's the same with us. Like we don't have a little goblin, a little ghost that is like doing all these things. It's not necessary. And so we're not consciousness experiencing form and mind. But you can look, okay, is that belief conditioned? And how does it arise and so on? Okay, Joe says, Sadhu for your morning talk. Glad you enjoyed it, Joe. Sadhu for your watching and your appreciation. Says, made me ask what the Buddha still had after his enlightenment. Made me think the most important qualities are karuna, anudya, and anukampa. Would you kindly study these three qualities, Venerable, and help us understand how these three qualities interrelate and benefit ourselves, others, both in the whole world? Yeah, I can look into those, Joe, and maybe we can, at some point in the future, maybe we can have a Dhamma talk on one of those. And Ryan says, and that condition phenomenon is also created by our environment, e.g. upbringing, contact with the world, etc. Yeah, like our upbringing and so on, those do condition it. Like if you're raised being told a particular view, if you're raised being told that you have an eternal soul inside of your body, then you're probably going to start thinking in that way, right? Just like Santa Claus. Or you're raised being told that you are just your body and there's nothing else but physical processes, then you're probably going to think that that's who you are. So the view of yourself is definitely conditioned by what you're told, your upbringing, but it's also conditioned by many other factors, not just that. And most importantly, it's conditioned by our sensory experiences and our craving and ignorance in regards to those. Okay, and then Mono says, how do we distinguish between rational and emotional beliefs besides it naturally coming to you? That's also a good question. What I would say is that I wouldn't say we have to distinguish between rational and emotional beliefs. I would say that our beliefs are kind of a mixture of both, right? It's often a mixture of the rational and the emotional. So in the West, there's this one way that we think about the mind is we say we have like the mind and we have the heart. So we have a kind of thinking mind and an emotional mind. But in Indian culture, like in Buddhism, for example, there is no separation between the emotional and the thinking part. It's all kind of connected. So it's all one organ, you could say. So the place, you could say, the organ or the mind that has thoughts and rational ideas is also the part that has emotional ideas. And that is our experience as well, I would say. Like it's true that sometimes it's helpful to distinguish between the thoughts and the feelings. But sometimes it's also important not to distinguish them so heavily. Because our thoughts are very influenced by our feelings, and our feelings are very influenced by our thoughts, and they're mixed. They're not completely separate. So I wouldn't say you necessarily need to distinguish, but I would say that it can be helpful to call up beliefs that are problematic, like beliefs in the self, and really just question that. Like, where is that coming from? And probably it's going to be mostly emotional with a mix of some opinions and thoughts and rational ideas. And Ryan says, in conclusion, the uninstructed mind will naturally lean toward greed, hatred, and delusion. Yes, exactly. Yep. If we don't train our mind, naturally it will incline towards greed, hatred, and delusion, as it has done for time without discoverable beginning. Okay, just a few more questions and we'll close here. Sorry for going over time. How does being unconscious craving differ from conscious craving, according to the Buddha? Does becoming aware or more aware make us more conscious? I'm not sure I understand your question, ZY, but I would say from a Buddhist perspective, it's not possible to have unconscious craving in the sense of like you're literally unconscious. Craving is a mental experience, right? So you have to have some kind of mentation, some kind of mind. However, maybe you mean by unconscious craving, you mean craving that we're not really clearly aware of, like we're not mindful of it. And I would say that becoming more aware of our craving does make us more. You say, does it make us more conscious? I would say becoming aware, more mindful of our craving, it makes us more aware of the consequences of that. So often we just follow it blindly. We just follow our desires and our hatred blindly. But when we start becoming mindful, we just realize we are like a dog tied up, or we're like caught up on a leash with an animal, which is actually dragging us around. Like we think we're walking the animal, but then we actually look at the scenario and actually the animal is walking us. So the craving and the hatred, they actually walk us. We don't actually control them. So yeah, becoming more aware of that, it is definitely can help us become more aware of the consequences. Like, wow, this is not good. Okay, and then we'll do one last question from Amaranta, who says, this sutta is very clear that we must not attach to nothing, to anything. Body is formed by elements, but mind is very complicated to think about it. What do you think about what is mind? Is it an emerging phenomenon? So I think what you're asking is, okay, so what is the mind? And is it an emergent phenomenon? Like maybe you mean, does it emerge from the brain or something? I would say that, sorry, I'm just going to turn my web around. Let's say just briefly here that the mind is, from a Buddhist perspective, kind of like a complex process. So it's really a variety, like a fruit salad of many different experiences, which are all kind of interwoven and wrapped together. And from a Buddhist perspective, the mind is neither emergent from the body, nor is it completely separate from the body. So the mind is, maybe very briefly, I would say the mind is like a chunk of life, which we abstract out and we say, this is mind. But it's not actually totally separate from the body, nor is it equal to the body. So we have life, and life is not cut up into categories. We do that with our conceptual apparatus. So that even the concept of mind as distinct from body is also a conceptual distinction that we make. So mind is just a conceptual distinction between some aspects of life. It's not emergent, nor is it independent. Okay, so sadhu everyone for listening. At this time we can close. So I hope that you have a wonderful night and good practice. And we will see you for the future. And we'll have a monk, Bante J. Very grateful to have him coming. So I assume that you'll be seeing him for some of the future live streams. So have a good night, and we'll see you next time.